Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Let's explore today's top news headlines for February 26, 2025. We're going to kick things off in Nigeria with some news about billionaire businesswoman Folorunsho Alakija.
Oh, yeah.
There are reports that she has completely lost her sight.
Wow, that's awful.
Yeah, and it seems like there might be a connection between her vision loss and a recent incident she had while flying with her husband, Modupe Alakija. Apparently, she experienced a near-air mishap that led to some pretty serious health complications. And her vision has been deteriorating ever since.
That's scary.
It is, and to add another layer to this whole thing, there are also rumors circulating about a potential separation between the couple after more than 30 years of marriage.
Really?
Yeah, and this combined with reports of her ordering a new jet after the incident to avoid flying with her husband paints a pretty interesting picture, to say the least.
Yeah, you could say that again.
It's definitely a lot to unpack, especially considering Alakija's impressive journey from fashion designer to oil tycoon.
Absolutely. Her story is a fascinating one.
She started out with a high-end fashion label, even boasting clients like Mariam Babangida, wife of the former dictator.
Right.
But her rise to wealth really took off when she secured a stake in the lucrative Agbami oil field. And that's where things get a little bit complicated.
How so?
Well, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding how she actually acquired that oil block.
I could see why.
Many believe that her connection to Mariam Babangida played a significant role,
Makes sense.
especially since the license was awarded during Babangida's regime, a period known for its lack of transparency, shall we say.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have a woman who amassed a fortune, allegedly through political connections, experiencing a significant personal setback while tangled in the web of a controversial figure from her past.
It's almost Shakespearean.
It really is. Speaking of Ibrahim Babangida, he's facing some legal trouble himself.
Oh.
Human rights lawyer Femi Falana is putting together a legal team to sue the former dictator over his detention back in 1993.
What was he detained for?
It all stems from Falana and his colleagues' opposition to Babangida's annulment of the June 12, 1993 election.
Right, a decision that still has a major impact on Nigeria today.
And what makes this even more interesting is that Babangida recently admitted to regretting the annulment in his new memoir.
Oh.
Well, Falana is arguing that this admission is proof that their prosecution on charges of treasonable felony was completely baseless. He's determined to seek justice for what he sees as a blatant violation of their rights, despite the fact that it happened over 3 decades ago.
Wow, he's not letting go.
He's not, which I guess is understandable. Okay, let's move over to Mali now, where the government is calling on the U.S. to take action against some of its own officials.
Interesting.
They are demanding that the U.S. prosecute officials who they allege funneled USAID funds to terrorist groups like Boko Haram.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and it comes at a time when tensions between Mali and the West are already pretty high.
I can...
This isn't just coming out of nowhere, though. It follows the cancellation of $14 million in U.S. aid to Mali, which the Malian government claims was supposed to be used for social cohesion projects. They see this whole incident as further proof of their long-held suspicions about foreign aid being weaponized to destabilize the region. Their argument is that this alleged misuse of funds has basically undermined the sovereignty and security of Sahel states, pushing them further into turmoil.
Okay.
It's important to mention that Mali has been strengthening ties with Russia and distancing itself from Western influence.
Right.
So this accusation definitely plays into that larger geopolitical narrative.
For sure.
And just to add, this coincides with a recent U.S. congressional investigation that revealed American taxpayer money potentially ending up in the hands of extremist groups, which is why the U.S. State Department has launched a review of its international funding programs. This whole situation raises serious concerns about transparency and accountability in aid distribution, not to mention the potential for these funds to be diverted for purposes that are completely opposite to what they were intended for. Let's go back to Nigeria for a second, specifically to the fallout from Babangida's memoir.
Okay.
The family of the late General Mamman Vatsa, who was executed in 1986 for allegedly plotting a coup against Babangida, is speaking out against the book. They're calling it a collection of distorted facts, and even going as far as to label it a good reference material for criminals.
Wow.
They're especially angry about Babangida's attempt to justify Vatsa's execution. They're claiming he's still trying to trouble them even after Vatsa's death. It's a pretty emotional response, which adds a really personal and tragic layer to this whole saga. They believe that the public reaction to the book launch, which has been met with a lot of criticism, kind of validates their view that Vats's execution was driven by personal vendetta rather than legitimate concerns. All right, let's switch gears and go over to the conflict in Ukraine. There's news that the country's parliament has passed a resolution confirming that no elections will be held during martial law. This move directly challenges President Trump's statement that President Zelensky's legitimacy is in question, because there haven't been any elections during the war. The resolution makes it very clear that Zelensky is the legitimate leader, and they say that elections will only be held after a just and lasting peace has been established. This all comes after Zelensky himself said that he'd be willing to resign if it meant guaranteeing peace or Ukraine's membership in NATO. It's a complicated situation, and the decision to postpone elections really highlights the difficulty of balancing democratic processes with the urgent need for stability and security during an active conflict.
Yeah, I get that.
On a sad note, we have to acknowledge the passing of Grammy-winning singer Roberta Flack. Flack, known for her iconic hits like Killing Me Softly with His Song, died at the age of 88. She'd been battling ALS since 2022 and unfortunately lost her ability to sing. Her death is a big loss for the music world. She was a true icon in R&B and soul music, known for her powerful vocals and deeply emotional performances. Okay, back to the global stage where we have a pretty surprising development.
All right.
The U.S. actually sided with Russia twice at the UN,
Really?
which essentially shielded Moscow from being condemned for its invasion of Ukraine.
It's a huge deal.
It is. It's a significant shift in the balance of power at the UN, and it definitely shows the growing rift between the U.S. and Ukraine under President Trump. This is causing a lot of concern among European nations who are watching all of this unfold with a mix of worry and disbelief.
Yeah, no kidding.
So the first vote happened at the General Assembly, where a resolution condemning Russia's actions was proposed.
Right.
And the second vote was at the Security Council, where a U.S. drafted resolution was debated. That resolution called for an end to the conflict, but it didn't actually blame Russia. So in both of these instances, the U.S. chose to side with Russia, which has raised a lot of questions about why there's been this sudden change in their approach.
I can see why.
Some people think it's a sign of Trump's personal connection with Putin, while others think it's a strategic move to try and appease Russia and maybe gain some leverage in other geopolitical areas. Whatever the reason is, it's definitely a big change from the united front that the international community showed at the beginning of the invasion.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, finally let's head to Canada, where Elon Musk is facing some public disapproval.
What happened?
Over 250,000 Canadians have signed a petition calling for his Canadian citizenship to be revoked.
Wow. Why?
This is all because of his close ties to President Trump and what people see as a threat to Canadian sovereignty,
Okay.
especially because of Trump's policies and his talk about annexation. The petition specifically mentions Musk's recent comment about Canada not being a real country as evidence that he doesn't respect their nation. They argue that his support for Trump, who's put tariffs on Canadian imports and has hinted at bringing Canada into the U.S., goes against their national interest.
I can see that.
Now, while legal experts don't think this petition will actually lead to Musk losing his citizenship, it's definitely a sign of the growing tension between Canada and the U.S. since Trump became president.
It seems like it.
It also shows how much scrutiny people with global influence, like Musk, are under because of their actions and who they associate with.
That's true.
In a world where everything is so interconnected, it seems like even the richest and most powerful people can't avoid public opinion. Their actions, especially those that are seen as going against national interests, can cause a big backlash and even lead to movements demanding that they be held accountable.
I guess so.
It just goes to show that even though you might have a lot of wealth and power, it doesn't mean you're exempt from being scrutinized or facing the consequences of your actions, especially in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected and transparent.
So let's go back to Folorunsho Alakija for a bit and her connection to Ibrahim Babangida.
Right.
You know, her losing her sight is a personal tragedy, for sure.
Yeah.
But it kind of gives us a look at how wealth, power, and even faith all come together in Nigeria.
You're right about that.
Her whole journey from fashion designer,
Yeah.
you know, dressing up the elite like Mariam Babangida to becoming this oil magnate.
Yeah.
It's a pretty fascinating example of how personal relationships can lead to success in Nigeria.
Absolutely.
And the fact that she showed up at Babangida's memoir launch, even with all the controversy surrounding it, it
Right.
just kind of emphasizes that point. you
Yeah.
know?
It does.
These connections, they stay strong even after decades.
It's interesting, too, because even though there are these allegations of shady dealings around how she got her oil wealth, she's built this image of herself as a philanthropist and a devout Christian.
Yeah, she has.
It's a bit of a contrast.
It is.
She founded the Rose of Sharon Glorious Ministry International, and she's even been ordained as an apostle.
Wow.
It shows a whole other side to her.
Yeah, it does.
Her story also kind of exposes the complicated nature of Nigeria's oil industry, which is often plagued by corruption and favoritism.
For sure.
The way she got that oil block during Babangida's time in office raises some serious questions.
Oh.
Transparency and accountability for sure.
Right.
It kind of feeds into this bigger idea of how political connections can be used for personal gain, possibly even at the expense of the country's resources.
That's a problem.
It is, and it's a narrative that continues to be relevant today, as Nigeria deals with a huge gap between the wealthy elite and the majority of its people who are struggling with poverty.
Yeah, the disparity is stark.
You've got Alakija with her private jets and luxurious homes, and then you've got everyday Nigerians struggling to make ends meet.
It's a reminder that things need to change.
Yeah, it is.
Huh.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about Femi Falana's lawsuit against Babangida.
Okay.
It's a great example of how the past can come back and demand accountability. I mean, Falana's been so determined to get justice for being detained. Even after all this time,
Yeah,
it really speaks volumes about his dedication to justice.
it does.
It shows how much he believes in the rule of law and how he refuses to let those in power escape the consequences of their actions.
Right.
I think it's a good reminder that the pain from past injustices can linger for a really long time,
Yeah.
especially when those responsible haven't been held accountable.
That's true.
You know, Babangida saying he regrets annulling the June 12th election. Some people might see that as him owning up to his mistakes.
Yeah,
But for Falana, and probably a lot of others who suffered under his rule, it's not enough.
I can see.
It makes you wonder, can apologies really fix past injustices? Especially when they come decades later after the damage has been done.
It's a tough question.
It is. This case also highlights how legal ideas are changing, particularly statutes of limitations.
What do you mean?
Well, those statutes have usually been used to prevent people from being prosecuted for crimes after a certain amount of time.
Right.
But now there's this growing movement to challenge that, especially when we're talking about serious human rights abuses.
Okay.
So, Falana's lawsuit could set a precedent for future cases, potentially allowing people to be held accountable even if it happened a long time ago.
That would be a big change.
It would. Okay, let's move on to Mali. Their claim that U.S. officials diverted USIG funds to terrorist groups is a very serious accusation.
It is.
It could have some really bad consequences.
Like what?
Well, it undermines trust in international aid and raises concerns about those funds being used for bad things.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
It is, and it shows how much distrust there is between Mali and the West, especially as Mali gets closer to Russia.
Right.
This shift in alliances
Yeah.
is changing things in the region. It's creating new challenges for Western nations who want to keep their influence.
Makes sense.
The U.S. government needs to address these accusations carefully because it's going to impact their relationship with Mali going forward.
I agree.
It might even have a broader impact on U.S. foreign policy in the region. This whole situation really emphasizes the need for more transparency and accountability when it comes to foreign aid.
Definitely.
Okay, back to Babangida's memoir.
Okay.
The criticism from General Maman Vatsa's family really shows how history can be subjective and how different people can have completely different versions of the same events.
Yeah, that's true.
Them calling the book a collection of distorted facts is a reminder that history is often written by those in power, and their version of events might not reflect the experiences of those who suffered under their rule. The Vatsa family's reaction, especially their statement that Babangida is still troubling them, even after Vatsa's death. It shows the lasting impact of trauma and the deep wounds left by state violence.
Oh, that makes sense.
It highlights the ongoing struggle for truth and reconciliation in Nigeria and the urgent need to address past abuses.
For sure.
Now, over in Ukraine, the parliament's decision not to hold elections during martial law sends a pretty strong message
To who?
to anyone questioning Zelensky's legitimacy. It's basically them asserting their own authority and their right to decide their own political processes even during a war.
Okay.
It shows how complicated it is to try and maintain a democracy during wartime, where finding that balance between stability and democratic principles is a real challenge.
I see that.
Them saying that elections will only happen after a just and lasting peace shows that they understand that real democracy needs some sense of normalcy and security to work.
Makes sense.
But it also raises the question, what does a just and lasting peace even look like?
Yeah.
And how can they achieve that in a conflict as complicated as this one?
Good question.
I don't think there are easy answers. It's something that'll probably be debated for years to come.
I'm sure.
Roberta Flack's death is a real loss for the music world.
It is.
Her voice and her music touched so many people. She was a true pioneer, breaking down barriers for female artists in R&B and soul.
Yeah.
Her legacy will definitely live on through her music. Okay, let's unpack this news about the U.S. siding with Russia at the UN.
Yeah.
Something that's gotten a lot of attention globally.
For sure.
It's a pretty big shift in U.S. foreign policy, and it's making a lot of European nations nervous. Their decision not to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sparked a lot of speculation
About what?
about what's behind this change in policy. Some people say it's because of Trump's relationship with Putin, while others see it as a strategy to appease Russia and maybe gain some leverage in other areas. Whatever the reason, it's a clear departure from that unified front we saw at the beginning of the invasion.
Definitely.
We're not sure yet what the long-term consequences of this will be, but it's something we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
It could really change the dynamics of global power in ways we can't predict right now.
That's a good point.
Finally, that petition to revoke Elon Musk's Canadian citizenship. It really shows how wealth, power, and national identity can clash. A lot of Canadians are upset about Musk's relationship with Trump, and they see him as a threat to their country's sovereignty. They basically see his loyalty to Trump as a betrayal of Canada. Now, even if this petition doesn't succeed legally, it's a clear sign of the growing tension between Canada and the U.S. under Trump's presidency.
Yeah, for sure.
It also shows how much scrutiny people like Musk, who have a lot of global influence, are facing because of their actions and who they're connected to.
I guess they're not immune to public opinion.
Exactly, their actions, especially when they're seen as harming national interests, can cause a lot of backlash and lead to people demanding that they be held accountable.
It makes sense.
It's a reminder that even with all the money and power in the world, you can't just do whatever you want without facing any consequences.
Especially in today's world.
Especially in today's world where everything is so interconnected and transparent.
It's kind of wild how all these headlines we've talked about, they all connect in a way.
Yeah.
It's like a snapshot of how power works, how politics play out, and the personal struggles people go through.
You hit the nail on the head there.
From the rich and powerful in Nigeria to the decisions being made at the UN,
Right.
from the war in Ukraine to what's happening in Canada, it all ties together, you know?
I see it.
It's like a tapestry of ambition, conflict, and people fighting for what's right.
And it reminds us that we're all connected.
Exactly.
What happens in one part of the world affects everyone else. It's like a chain reaction.
That's a good way to put it.
It shows how important it is to stay informed, to understand the forces shaping our world, and to talk about these challenges in a thoughtful way.
I couldn't agree more.
One thing that's become clear from these headlines is that there are no easy answers.
Nope.
These are complicated issues with lots of different viewpoints, and the only way to really understand them is through open and honest conversations.
Absolutely.
But even with all the challenges, there's still hope.
There is.
People are still fighting for justice, working towards peace, and showing incredible resilience.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
Like Femi Falana, he's not giving up on holding people accountable. And the Ukrainian people, they're determined to protect their country. And Roberta Flack's music, it continues to inspire people.
It's a testament to the power of the human spirit.
It is. It really is. So as we wrap up our look at today's top news headlines, let's hold on to the insights we've gained, the questions we've asked, and the hope we've seen. Let's keep engaging with the world. Keep searching for truth and justice. And keep striving for a better future for everyone. Thank you for listening to the Today's Top News Headlines on IAM Free Radio and Podcast.